Welcome. Thank you to everyone joining us online and here at the ASU California Center at the historic Herald Examiner Building. With great respect, Zócalo Public Square acknowledges the Yuhaviatum, the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory of Yangna that we now know as downtown Los Angeles. We honor their elders, past and present, and the Yuhaviatum descendants who are part of the Gabrielino Tongva and the Fernandeño Tataviam nations. We recognize that the Tongva are still here, and we are committed to lifting up their stories, culture, and community. As Kuyam, we recognize our responsibility and obligation to care for their land. I'm Bianca Collins. I'm Director of Public Programs at Zócalo Public Square in Arizona State University Media Enterprise. At Zócalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free, and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org, on podcast platforms and YouTube, so please subscribe for our latest programs. Tonight, I'm so pleased to welcome you all for a program asking, what is the value of art? It's my true honor to have brought together an outstanding coalition of partners to co-present this program, NeueHouse, KCRW, and the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. After the program, please join us for an after party at NeueHouse Bradbury until 10:30, where we'll have music by KCRW DJ Novena Carmel and complimentary drinks for our first 100 guests. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Zandy Brockett, Director of Community and Culture at NeueHouse.
Thank you, Bianca. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zandy Brockett. I'm the Director of Community and Culture, and I'm delighted to be here with you all tonight. NeueHouse is a private social and workspace with locations in New York, Hollywood, Venice Beach, and downtown in the historic Bradbury building, which, as Bianca said, we invite all of you to come join us later tonight for a really fun after party with Novena Carmel. NeueHouse curates and hosts a myriad of cross-disciplinary cultural programs that explore topics ranging from the future of music rights in Web3 to chick lit to underground Latinx drag scenes in 1980s LA. From discursive programs to jazz residencies, our partnerships with local and global organizations have allowed us to activate moments like Banji Ball, the West Coast's largest ball, to Lunar Noya Year, which we will be celebrating this weekend, as well as a series of programs across our houses for Frieze Week. We're thrilled to partner with Zócalo Public Square, KCRW, and the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art for tonight's program. It's an honor to introduce you to our moderator this evening, Helen Molesworth. Helen is a writer and curator based in Los Angeles. She recently hosted Death of an Artist, a 6-part podcast about the intertwined fates of Carl Andre and Ana Mendieta. Her major museum exhibitions include Leap Before You Look, Black Mountain College from 1933 to 1957, Dance, Draw, and This Will Have Been, Art, Love, and Politics in the 1980s. She has organized monographic exhibitions of Ruth Asawa, Noah Davis, Carrie James Marshall, and Catherine Opie. She received the Bard Center for Curatorial Studies Award in 2011, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2021, and in 2022, she was awarded the Clark Art Writing Prize. Over to you, Helen.
Hi, everybody. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Zandy, for that introduction. I appreciate it. And for Bianca and Sarah and the whole team here for gathering us tonight. It's a lot of work. I'm so happy. So just one quick moment, because many of you probably know who have RSVP'd for this event that Sandra Jackson Dumont, who is the director of the Lucas Museum for Narrative Art, which is being built over in Exposition Park, was scheduled to be on this panel. But yesterday, when she was visiting with her mother in San Francisco, she realized that her mother was having some kind of cardiac distress. As those of you know, heart attacks present in women very differently than they present in men. And Sandra decided to take her mother to the hospital. And she was, in fact, having a heart attack. She's having a procedure today. So I would just love, like, if we could all just have a little internal moment of sending the most divine, prayerful, spiritual energy to Mrs. Jackson Dumont's mother, because any woman who made a woman like Sandra deserves all of our good feeling. So just to have that moment. Thank you. All right, so as you know, I'm Helen Molesworth, and I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists and get into this conversation. From my right, Andrea Bowers is a LA-based artist who's been recording and amplifying the work of activists present and past for more than 2 decades. Her practice foregrounds the experience of the people who dedicate their time and energy to the struggle for gender, racial, environmental, labor, and immigration justice, and those who are directly affected by systemic inequality. In 2021, a major mid-career survey of Bowers' work that was curated by Michael Darling and our very own LA-based Connie Butler opened at the MCA Chicago and traveled to the Hammer Museum. I saw the show. It was absolutely fantastic. Bowers is represented by a suite of galleries: Vielmetter, Andrew Krebs, Kaufman Repetto, Capitan Petzel, and Jessica Silverman. Next to her is Joel Garcia, who is Huichol and an indigenous artist and cultural organizer that uses indigenous-based frameworks and art-based strategies such as printmaking, installation, creative action, and altar making to center and raise awareness of issues facing underserved communities, youth, and other targeted populations. In various roles, he's worked with indigenous communities across borders in support of issues of land access and self-determination. His work explores healing and reconciliation, as well as memory and place. He's a current Stanton Fellow and a former Fellow of Monument Lab, as well as a co-facilitator of the Intercultural Leadership Institute, which proposes to hold space for cultural production outside of white suprematist frameworks. And then Hamza Walker, who is Sandra Jackson Dumont's understudy today, who literally responded to a frantic, barely literate text from myself at around 9:30 this morning, asking if he would attend, with the simple response, yes. Exactly. Hamza gets a little extra something, something. Hamza is the director of LAXART, a nonprofit art space here in LA. Prior to joining LAXART in 2016, he was the director of education and the associate curator at the Renaissance Society at the University of Chicago, a non-collecting contemporary art museum. That's like a supreme, that's such a bland description of who you are and what you have done that it borders on the false. But I'll proceed. Recent exhibitions at LAXART include Nikita Gale, Takers from 2022, a Candace Williams and show with Cassandra Press, which is Candace's press, The Absolute Right to Exclude from 2021, and Post Commodities, Some Reach While Others Clap. And the Some Reach While Others Clap, that could give you a little indication of the kind of brain that Hamza has. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to begin, and I have prepared 3 questions. The panelists do not know what these questions are.
It's like a game show.
You wish this was a game show. You wish there was a car behind that. There's a car over there and a bachelor over there. You're welcome. All right, we are here ostensibly to discuss the value of art. And so I thought maybe one way we could ground ourselves as a panel and also with our audience, is that I'm going to ask each of you if you could describe an encounter with a work of art that was formative for the work you're doing now. It can be a work of art you saw as a child, it could be a work of art you saw recently. But if we're going to talk about the value of art, I want to know, what kind of encounter have you had recently with something that moved you and that is somehow connected to the work that the three of you are trying to do out in the world? Hamza?
I mean, I usually am not a fan of, origin stories. It's like, of a sort. When I was a child, I was at the museum. But when I was a 15-year-old racing and running the streets of Baltimore, young punk, there was a piece, Brenda Richardson, who was the curator, Baltimore. Of course, you would know, Helen. I'm bringing up your old stomping grounds.
They fired that woman and gave me her job.
They
They did.
That's...
Little ghost of Christmas future.
It's like, this is why I said yes. This could go so many directions other than sideways. Yeah, Helen and I, this is another time. This is when your memoirs come out. I want dibs as the interviewer.
Oh, you got it. It would
go
be
back
my
to Brenda
honor.
Richardson, seminal influence on me because of the work that she did as a curator at the Baltimore Museum of Art. She scored all those late Warhols. And the foresight, that was amazing. So just having that around. But the Bruce Nauman on the outside of the Baltimore Museum of Art, violence, silence, violence, violins, which you could see from quite a distance. And if you were a young punk, all of the, friends saw that piece. It was like, silence, violence, violence. I don't know what that is, but it's cool. So it wasn't even art. Like we didn't know what it was, just as a sign, out in the world, broadcasting this message, and the kind of the sequence that those Nauman neons run in. But that would go to a whole question about, in terms of how I got here. I mean, how did any of us get here in terms of this business and with art? And not being able to really locate it, whether it was, the Velvet Underground and Nico, right? The Andy Warhol album cover. And my thing with album covers is, by and large, that is the art that was in everybody's home, or at least, and by art, I mean, what is the thing in your home that pretty much occupied your visual attention the most, right? So we didn't have art, like paintings or anything up. It was either like, books, book spines, book jackets, but album covers were the thing I probably spent the most time staring at.
Right.
And it took me a long time to be able to admit that, right?
Right.
Like, really in terms of what makes up my visual diet. So the Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers. Warhol did that album cover.
Right.
So even at that level, in terms of like what was out there and what would matriculate in as art encounters or experiences, I tend not to want to place them inside of the big house that is the museum in terms of how we produce meaning, or where we produce meaning, as much as thinking about it as just part of the flotsam and jetsam of life. And what were those things that then in retrospect look at it and go, oh yeah, check it out,
Right. That's beautiful. Well?
I would have to say Dolly, but I think as an artist, like reaching that technical excellence is something that you want to do. But as Hamza was talking, I'm thinking more of that scene in Purple Rain, right? Because I think art is for me too, like how you hold space for people. And that scene where the camera's panning in the crowd and you see the punks and the goths and all these different folks. I think as an artist for me is like, how can I do the work to bring that type of diversity in the crowd together to do something? And that stuck with me. And every time I see that scene in Purple Rain, I think it's like, that's what I want to hit. Like, I want to be able to do that. So it isn't the music. I mean, the music has a lot to do with it, and the history of that place where that scene was shot. Like those folks were actually there. Like they were part of that club. They were part of that space that both welcomed the punk rockers, but also the black music, the black folks. So for me, that work as an artist is hard to do, but when you do get it right, and when you make it part of your practice, it can do a lot of stuff.
Right.
So for me, that's always been like a pivotal thing. Like Prince got it right.
I'm loving this so far. Bruce Nauman, Warhol, Nico, Dolly, Prince, Andrea.
Well, I'm going to say two things. I'm going to say that, just quickly, I think that the ACT UP posters and ad campaigns were some of the most important artworks that inspired me. And then last weekend, I was in New Mexico, in Berlin, New Mexico, to see a film about the making of documentary about the making of the dinner party. And it was 3 women were speaking who were, so the making of the dinner party, everybody's like, oh yeah, those like central core imagery plates, like the vagina plates or whatever. But like the amount of people it took to make that, I mean, there were hundreds of people, young people and experts who worked on that project. But every Thursday night, they would get together and they would have talks. And it was full-on fights. Like, it was intense. Judy was intense. But I'm like, okay, so now these women are lawyers. One of them runs Bruce Nauman's like studios, which is monumental. The other woman's a lawyer. But out of that, I'm like, there's public practice. Like, there's social engagement. There's collective action. There's politics, and there's a really beautiful, old-fashioned traditional artwork. So I think that in that piece, and the documentation of that piece is like really important to me in terms of like all the things that I try to touch on in my practice.
Well, that's really, all of those answers are beautiful to me, and what I hear in them that holds them together is how for each of you, there is a group of people that you are attached to, emerging from, or seeing that you kind of want to be a part of, whether it's the punks in Baltimore, you and the crowd scene in Purple Rain, and you with the dinner party and the hundreds of people it required to take that, right? So we're already in a space in which the traditional definition of art is been opened up, right? It's not a single proper name. It wasn't, I went to the museum and saw Rothko and, had to bow down, right? You're already this idea that community or being in community with others is somewhere at stake in your practice or in these early experiences. So I think that Zócalo has brought us here together in advance of the Frieze Art Fair. It's like a little bit of a leading question, right? We're, because we want to talk about the value of art outside of perhaps its market value. And obviously, I think one of the reasons we're here is because the current media obsession with art is very much rooted in its market value. These fairs get enormous attention. They occupy the public's imagination about what art is. Current news coverage of art often says how much things cost in the newspaper. Things that were used to be not the way we discussed art in public. And, no buts, only ands. And the reality of art in the West is that art and money have been together, like they've been married like forever. This is a 100-year-old marriage. Like they get married like in and with the Roman Catholic Church, then artists invent portable painting so they can move around. So they're not totally dependent on the church, but then the only people who can afford it and know how to, even have a place where you could put it would be the monarchy. So you move from the church, you move into a monarchical situation. Then the aristocrats get pissed off that the monarchs have everything, so they muscle their way into the art thing. Then, around about the 17th century, we get the emergence of a bourgeois class. So you would get the emergence of a certain kind of family that is able to buy pictures, buy art objects. That carries us right into the Enlightenment. We get a little French Revolution, we get a little American Revolution. And if we fast forward to the 20th century, we get the idea of the museum in this country as an edifying institution dedicated to knowledge, open to the quote-unquote general public. We get this phrase called the general public. That is a phrase that really occupies the museum imagination. So in some way, one could say that in the long game of art, it's been opening and opening and opening and opening in this Western tradition in which it's so married to money. And I guess I wonder if each of you could, in whatever way you want to, either blow up that kind of potted history of art in the West and its attachment to money, or feed into it and see, are we, despite the voraciousness of the market at the moment, are there other strains of what we're doing that are, in fact, opening up this field and making what we do much more porous and not as bound to these big kind of white elephant institutions and or the market, which is where art seems to sort of toggle in between these spaces. Which is another way of saying, where's your hope meter at on this long game that we're playing with art? Because art really is a long game.
I want to believe it's as long as the species itself game. So we'll continue to do it as long as we're around. It's just part and parcel of what it is that we do. So despite all the institutional, apparatus, that surrounds it, there's a dimension of it that in terms of where the hope meter is. At least that's why I always feel, market, this, that, or the other, good, bad fact of life. I'm not bothered by it. It's there, but it isn't the end all and be all in any way whatsoever in terms of a gauge of the value, of work. But I'm interested in, I saw maybe 2, if not 3 Picasso shows recently. The one at the Hammer, the paper one, which is great, and the Picasso and Trompe l'oeil, or the Cubism and the Trompe l'oeil at the Met, also great show. And the Picasso, stood out there. But just thinking about, those artists who I admire specifically because of the spirit, the ethos of the work, you get a sense that it's like, no. If this person was in a house with just with a piece of cardboard and a piece of string, they're gonna make some art.
Right.
They're just compelled to do this, and they have a way in terms of it's just all about up here. It's about the imagination and a certain kind of inventiveness, and that's the spirit. You see the Picassos, and it's like, oh my God, this guy, he could date him by the hour. At a certain point, you feel like it's like, don't sweat the technique, I think Saul LeWitt, who always paraphrased Gertrude Stein, the work of art is either priceless or worthless.
Right.
And in terms of the spirit of that kind of work, about the ability to, it's a piece of folded up paper, that is the work, its ability to be given away almost. Or David Ham is another kind of magic, right? Where the work is the closest thing I can think of is magic, right? How can you get away with this slight a movement to have this maximum effect? So that kind of spirit where it transcends or moves through, under, so to some extent it can be, subterfuge, in other cases, but so much bigger than, simply, objects for sale. There might be that dimension, or the ability for the market to then absorb those gestures, whatever they may be, comes well after the fact. And that the value ascribed to the work, I want to believe, is first and foremost driven by the spirit and the kind of energy that artist kind of exudes.
I'm remembering with, I don't know if folks here know who the Chicano art group ASCO is.
Very much so.
And as an artist, you want to be accepted in these spaces, right? But that moment of rejection is also an opportunity, and ASCO definitely banked on that, on that rejection. And also working with artists now, like a lot of times the end product, the mural, the painting, isn't even the piece that like pays the bills. It's the content that they produce for social media that drives the ads, that drives now the income. But ASCO did this really well in the 80s. They documented everything they did. They staged everything they did, even if it never happened, right? There are no movies. And for me, like that idea, like the unpopular in between that they always like promoted, right? Like the spaces in which the spotlight isn't in is where like a lot of the magic happens. So for me, that always just stuck. Like it isn't what's being showcased like at these arts fairs that is gonna teach us anything or gonna be groundbreaking. It's what's happening like on the outside of it. And that's where, I think you find the magic and the change and the artists who are figuring things out. For me, along the way, we removed art from the art making, from the culture of being an artist, or the idea that we, like as artists, we embody this thing, and that it's just another form of language of communicating, that artists make sense of the world in different ways. And we've forgotten that. And I think the more we allow artists to build bridges for different communities, different understandings, the less these art fairs are able really to commodify like what the purpose of art is. And for me, it's like, communicating with one another.
Andrea?
I'm not really sure what the question is. I think they're both brilliant. What's the,
One of the things I'm interested in is, I guess my question is, one, do you see an increasing democratization of art or a decreasing democratization of art?
I see a decreasing democracy.
You see a decreasing democratization.
I see a decrease of democracy in general. I can't
That
really
is so true.
separate art from capitalism, right? Like we're stuck as artists and curators and directors, and
All of us.
we're stuck in this, I wasn't gonna cuss, in this fucked up system. And all of like the problems that I kind of have all revolve around the problems with this, but also we're stuck in this system.
Right.
And so a lot of times, no one would care about some of the work I make if I didn't have attention in museums and galleries, and that's attached to the market.
Right.
And that brings attention to when Toccata Iron Ice gives this beautiful video, this talk. But at the same time, I hate the connection. For me, it is this horrible, frustrating contradiction that I struggle with constantly.
Right.
I mean, I'm lucky to be in that position. What scares me is that when I moved to LA, I'm old now. When I moved to LA, there was no market, and people were just like, well, that's career suicide to live in Los Angeles. And I was like, but it's warm, I'm from Ohio, But now I see young people who don't understand that there was this like avant-garde, and there were these like one of the things I love most about Hamza is like his knowledge of art, right? Like, he can talk about the most amazing, rare conceptualist piece that I've never seen. You know,
Have your Michael Asher postcards.
I know. Do you still have
I
my
do.
Michael
I
Asher
do. I
shit?
have them, yeah.
Are you sure? I want those back.
Know exactly
Anyway.
where they are.
So like, but now I see, because of the success, and maybe I don't want to judge anybody, but I see young people who just want to make money, right? Like, I feel like these things we talked about, changing systems and, you know, thinking about new ways of making art that would, like, I don't know, like critique, I don't know, the way that like scatter art was actually interested in critiquing the war machine of you know, and the people behind it were like, you know, the people who bought art were the same people who were like paying for wars, stuff like that. Like, I worry that that kind of level of discourse isn't involved right now, you know. I don't know, but I want to see more of that come back. I think the market can dumb down. It has a way to also be more inclusive too, if it chooses to. But I worry that it's still capitalism.
Yeah, that capitalism game, it's ruthless. It's a very, very ruthless game, and none of us, as we know, can operate outside of it. There is no outside of that formation, if for no other reason than we all need to make rent. You know, we all need food, and there's really very, very few places on the earth where you can be outside of that system and still, you know, meet your basic needs. But it's so interesting to me that Hamza and Joel brought up Hammonds and ASCO, like, you know, and that you both use the words magic, right? That one of the things art is even though there's no outside, I sometimes wonder, is art, is this part of its value, that it is still the peephole to another place. It is a kind of portal. Like, it does do a kind of work that lets us either see our conditions for what they are and face them, but does it also still function for all of you despite the kind of crushing internal contradictions of capitalism? Are you all still in the game, so to speak, because it has a value that cannot somehow be circumscribed by capitalist notions of value?
I think financially stable, or I was able to become financially stable the moment that I abandoned the idea of making art.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
When I became comfortable saying, like, this funding stream doesn't work, how can we take it apart? How can we, like, practice real equity with funding for artists? That for me became a way to be a consultant. You know, folks who closed doors on me then later on realized, like, wait a minute, like, maybe we need to have a conversation. And being an artist without making something is what's allowed me to actually pay my bills.
So if I hear you, then you're making a distinction, and clearly this distinction exists between an artist and art.
Or the idea of producing, when we talk about capitalism, right?
Right.
That productivity is valued over process.
So could you then, if you wouldn't mind, could you define for me and everyone here what an artist is? Because maybe we're coming at this the wrong way. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about the value of art. Maybe we should be talking about the value of artists. I'm not sure.
True. I think if we let artists kind of embody that role, or let me back up a little bit. For communities like mine that indigenous communities, an artist or somebody who we now define as an artist would play the role of an educator to an extent. or a translator, a seer, right? The capacity to see things in a way that most folks might not. Some of the work that I've done, although it haven't produced something physically, has been also looking at policy and finding the gaps and the opportunities to define something that might not be defined. For example, when we toppled the Sarah statue, we knew that there wasn't a process to remove racist monuments in LA. And that became an opportunity to push and do something and define the undefined, and then force the city council to define a process that empowers community. I think as an artist, we're able to do those things, whereas somebody who just does policy might be so deep into it that then they don't see like where these points of intervention where artists can exploit those and create stuff.
Andrea, how would you define an artist?
First of all, I just wanted to say, to answer your other question, that the one thing I truly, truly believe in is the power of art. Super optimistic about art. I think that art can do things that nothing else can do in the way that we experience it. I think that most importantly, an artist is a critical, creative thinker.
Critical creative thinker.
And since COVID, I had no faith in form or material or aesthetic until COVID, because I was alone and it brought me such great pleasure and got me through a lot of emotional stuff, I think. And so it's making me rethink all of that. But I think critical creative thinking is the most, I don't think it's good art without that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I do believe in craft.
Hamza, how would you define what an artist is?
Oh my God, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's really hard.
You are an artist, though, in the way that you curate, the way you think, the way you talk. You both are.
Cultural bureaucrat. It's, I work for the city of Chicago.
That's your other
After 5 years working for the city of Chicago, that's. I'll show you some scars. I got them to show.
See how he avoided that?
No. That's. But as far as participation within being, to go back to that initial question, and maybe it wasn't so much works of art that were, yes, there were works of art that would be seminal, I guess, in terms of formative experiences. But maybe just the drive to want to be around artists, recognizing a cultural community, and that's a place that I wanted to be. As hard as it might be to define that, kind of found the kinds of questions. Curiosity, I guess that would be the real, the thing that, a space where I could sustain. It was willing to go as far as I could go with questions and still keep going.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, well, how curious are you? And, so what are those things that, exhaust your curiosity, or is it inexhaustible? And art happens to be a space where I feel like it's like, okay, great. I can just keep on keeping on, and it can give me more, and keep kind of generating a curiosity that just keeps me going. So artists were those people that would do things that would just make me curious, and I could, ask questions and just talk shit for hours.
Right.
And that was really that I lived for that space.
Yeah.
And I couldn't to see those things, to hear those things, concerts, see gigs, see performances, that kept you coming back for more. first hit's always free. You know, he's
That's
you know,
so Baltimore.
where do I get more of this? I'm not done yet. You know, it was sort of the, so still, you know, still chasing that high.
Right. So one of the most, I think, trenchant and bracing new conversations that, I don't know if it's new, but it's a newly invigorated conversation, is a lot of museums, cultural spaces, through thinking about equity, which Joel has already brought up, that a lot of folks are trying to think about how we hook up this extraordinary engine called art and artists, a space of critical thinking, a space of seeing, a space of curiosity, how we're able to hook this engine up to something called social justice. Now, this is not in and of itself straightforward to me, you know, because there's lots of forms that you could want to hook up or attach as an engine to a growing demand, particularly on the part of an emergent generation, for social justice, for new form, to think about social justice, not as something that had been completed, but that is something very much a project as yet unrealized. And I'm curious for each of you what it is about art, either as a practice or a set of objects or the art world that we're kind of sitting in today, this ad hoc. My friend Greg Bordowitz always says the only politics are the politics in the room. So we're a room, and we constitute the art world right now. What
Just got a big job.
Greg did just get a big job. What is it about art that makes it hooking up to social justice, do you think, effective, useful, valuable, or not? I mean, do you think we've misplaced our attentions here? How do you think we can do this work productively together as we're and maybe not so much the how, but like, what is it about art specifically that has allowed this connection to become so alive for so many of us right now?
I think to answer that, I want to clear up some assumptions. As an artist, assuming that we want the US as we know it to continue to exist, right? The place temporarily known as Los Angeles. Like, how much are we investing in upholding this construct of LA? And so as an artist who's committed to seeing this as temporary, like it ends at some point, when I do my work, I'm hoping that it inches to that, right? The dismantling of capitalism, the dismantling of patriarchy. When as artists, we're assuming that like we're investing in the idea of upholding the US, or in this case, Los Angeles, then we've already kind of lost the end goal, which is justice, right? So as a frame, LA has been an unjust place from the beginning, with the incarceration and enslavement of indigenous folks. This is the root of mass incarceration as we know it. This is the root of the systems that gentrify communities across the country. And as a city, we don't even know that history. So if I'm being asked as an artist to do work that speaks to displacement, to incarceration, then I must know that LA as it currently exists needs to cease to exist. And that's a big thing to process, absorb, and be at peace with.
So can I ask you then, when you're making work, is there something about this category that we call art, which is a big baggy category, right? That, you know, we throw a lot of stuff in that category. Is there something specific to that category that helps you think about the dismantling of this construct of Los Angeles? Like, does it get you something that maybe some other practice might not get you? Like being an athlete. Like, is there something about being an artist that is really germane to the dismantling that you're discussing?
Well, we can create a new way of seeing things, right? Like one of the things that the Zapatistas say is like everybody's an artist, but also the idea that we can create many worlds and where many worlds fit. So the undefined for an artist, I think for me is like exciting to see like this space is cluttered with a lot of resistance and resiliency, but this space over here is completely open for creating the world that can hold a lot of us. So going back to that scene in Prince, where can we all be together, where we're like on equal terms, we're walking towards something. The idea of dismantling Los Angeles doesn't mean to, or the idea that there's fear in thinking of that, rather than thinking that if we dismantle something like the notion of a city, or the idea that we need a mayor or a city council, there's like a fearful implication, rather than thinking like maybe there's a lot of beauty and opportunity in creating something that isn't rooted in white supremacy. So as artists, I think we also ask big questions.
Right. Hamza, what about that category art for you, and what is it about it that is making it available to hook up to this other idea about justice and equity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm let's say, and I'll speak more from the position of organizing exhibitions. To think of them as it relates to topics of social justice, and the way that what the arts experience, the ways, how and in what ways does it move you, inform you in a way that you couldn't get in another form, right? And to respect that for what it for all of its progressive dimensions, regressive dimensions, dead ends, cul-de-sacs, the whole thing, right? So I'm not just thinking about art necessarily as affirmational per se, right? What does art have to say about basic alienation? It can mirror certain conditions, and in mirroring those conditions, produce a kind of radical consciousness of those very conditions, if you let it. So, I guess I'd be somewhat wary of art being instrumentalized under the umbrella or rubric of social justice, while at the same time saying, feeling like, oh no, that it can play a very key and important role in, at least galvanizing what is its relationship to, again, consciousness, the articulation of issues, discourse in general, how can they function, how can exhibitions function to say, in their own way, raise certain questions. Because it isn't, I don't think, in terms of solving problems of social justice, do I go to museums or go to look at art for solutions? And to be honest, in most cases, not necessarily. I have to ask myself, what, if anything, am I looking for when I go, to look at stuff, in a certain sense. But there are those experiences that do inform me in terms of critical capacities, in terms of thinking, that I don't get simply through what I hear on the radio, journalism, what I read in the newspaper. But the overlay of those things, right, between, information, right, and how does art function in relationship to a world of information? How does information inform the art? How does the art inform the information? And that they're enmeshed and intertwined in this thing that I'm calling consciousness is very, very important, I think. Now, but I don't think of, in terms of how art is used, when I hear those terms about social justice and how quickly it can be pushed or can instrumentalized in that claims can be made on its behalf about addressing conditions and issues that I'm suspect of, I guess. When I want more attention paid to art for what it is kind of unto itself, which is not to say it's altogether removed or isolated from life itself, but to be a little bit more wary and cautious and critical about that relationship between those terms of social justice, and art.
Two quick facts. Through the pandemic, we realized that we can't live without art. Like, we need art in some form in our life to feel good. LA is one of the largest creative economies in the world.
Right.
But it also has, artists here are paid, are low-wage workers. So to me, I guess the question is, like, do we actually value art at all?
Right. Andrea, do you want to take a little crack at this before I open it up to audience questions?
I mean, I agree that, like, art is more than, it's not in the category of social justice.
No, I think it's its own category.
It's its own category.
But people wanna harness it.
I think
seems
that
like.
it's just been a passion of mine for a long time as a subject matter in my work, and to come up with strategies like how I can be of service, and what art can do. So, I mean, like I right now I'm like looking, so in my generation is the only generation for my whole productive life that I was able to get an abortion, right? Our generation. And so right now in my studio, I have documents from the late 60s from the Army of Three. They gave me a lot of their archives. Pat McGinnis did. And I have it, and they're all up on my walls. My walls are filled with them, and I'm reading all of them. So, you go back to, I think, Hal Foster and this kind of like idea of like the archival impulse, right? Like, I can take a lot of time. Art is slow. I don't have to keep up with the speed. So I'm interested in that slowness and social justice. Like, I can look at these documents and do something with them from the 60s, and it's going to have an impact. So, like, as artists, we're doing other things, but we're using aesthetics and materials, and we can find things or use things that maybe in this really fast-paced world might slip by, right? And look at them again. I spent all day reading yesterday, So it's sad, but I think...
artists.
Huh?
I love artists. I love y'all.
But
I love
somehow
y'all.
is my answer that, I don't know, that I think, that...
No, I think that's a beautiful answer. And my friend, the artist Josiah McElhaney, once swung his arms wide open on Michigan Avenue in Chicago in front of the Art Institute of Chicago. And he said, "Look," he said, "a machine for slowness."
Exactly. It's such a beautiful thing.
It's such a beautiful
You can make
thing.
like a 3-hour documentary,
Okay.
All right.
You guys are hard for me to see because of the lighting, and I apologize. There are so many of you over here, and I've had my back to you. My grandmother would not approve. My apologies.
So question
Is-
and answer.
Yeah, questions. I'm sure there's a microphone going around somewhere.
It's over here. If you have a question, please come line up. I
Oh,
see someone
okay.
right here. We're
I
ready
see
to go.
someone raising their hand, but you should go and line up.
If you can please say your name and keep the question brief.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, my name is Rajane, and I wanted to know you guys' thought on, or you all's thought on, what can you predict about art with the influence or progression of artificial intelligence?
It's the new dreaded question, AI. Dun 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 dun. Dun dun. Anybody got an AI answer?
Artificial intelligence is like versus organic stupidity.
Right, exactly. That assumes the intelligence
a new category.
has been.
But I've always been amazed. I mean, the whole relationship between art and theory, right? Which, I mean, I just want to say we're children of that kind of merger, right? In a certain way, and how much art has at least, despite a seeming Reese's peanut butter cup kind of relationship between those things, I always thought of art as like answering, presenting itself almost in earnest as something of a contradiction to theory, in a way. It's like, oh, is this what you meant? And, to the shock and dismay of theorists, whoever they may be. And sometimes I want to think with like artificial intelligence, it's like, no, like Andrew was saying, art and slowness. It's like this, it's something, it's like, no. Like it's just in terms of an engagement. But it'll get there and probably already has been there. In terms of, perhaps getting at, I was terribly tickled today that Google introduced some new search engine, I don't know what it was, that was an answer in response to Microsoft's thing. But the basic question that they asked, whatever AI program it was about teaching children about the images of planets outside the solar system was the question. And this new piece of software that Google had introduced, this very basic question that it got the question wrong. And this is today, this is this morning. And it was great. Google stock dropped right after that. It was like, no. Which I kind of like. And I don't know if that answers the question about art as much as like common sense.
Right.
As a response to that. But who knows, it isn't a question about with art and artificial intelligence. I just feel like it's like, who knows where we're headed in general with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, exactly.
Would be more the thing.
Either of you guys, or should we move to the next question, or do you want to take a crack at it?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, who gets to control this? For me, is the question.
Exactly.
It'll be a disaster.
Right. For me, the AI thing is a bit like the NFTs. It's a corporate platform. Beware. Yes, please.
All right, next question.
Hi, my name is Lorraine, and my art is compassion of art. And I started like her. I started in the pandemic. I didn't know anything about art. And I have painted over 1,000. I have made a book. But the questions that Helen was asking you was so touching to my heart. And it's so many artists, and my first one I went to was the Frieze Festival, and I talked to and saw a lot of beautiful art and stuff like that, and I was part of it. But how do you keep the patience of dealing with putting your art out there, and how do you feel about the piece that you created?
I try to separate the market from my practice. And when I mean practice, I try not to get attached to every piece. I try to love the process.
Okay. All right, we're gonna get one more. We're gonna try to get these last two questions in, and then we'll wrap up.
Go for it.
My name is Sandy Shimaoka, and I'm going to throw this out there for you guys. Just want to know what you think. So I try to think about what's fair and if we're at a worse time or a better time than now. And I think about like 30 years or so ago when apartheid ended and the wall came down. And I think that was, to me, optimism. And then in terms of art, I think what's the pinnacle? It's sort of, I look back to the cave paintings like Lascaux, and when artists were making art that didn't have to do with schooling and it didn't have to do with an economy. And there was no financial, they didn't even know if anybody would ever see it again, but they still made it, and it's still beautiful, and it speaks to us even today. So that's like a gift. So I know that art means something, because even when it was made without an economy behind it, that it still had a purpose, and we still feel it today. But I also think, like, whether it's fair, it's like, you know, you think about Rembrandt or even with the Medicis. I don't know if art was ever fair. I still don't think it's fair for teachers or anybody else in our society, so I don't know what you think about all that. It kind of, in a way, reflects the inequity in all of our economy. Like,
Yes. Yes. I think the consensus of the panel is yes.
Yes. Okay, last question. Please say your name. Keep it brief.
Hi, my name is Daniel Anaya, and I was just listening to some of the banter, looking at the chat. You know, when I read this title for this discussion, I thought immediately of the value of art to society in terms of like fomenting change or the evolution of our society, you know, hopefully in a positive direction. And I'm Chicano, so I think of artists like David Siqueiros or the famous muralist Frida Kahlo's husband, Diego Rivera. You know, and you know the famous.
Can we just have a minute? Can we just have a minute that just fucking happened? That just fucking happened.
Frida Kahlo's husband. Okay.
Frida Kahlo's husband. That guy.
I don't know. I remember Frida Kahlo better than. But anyway, and the Rockefeller Plaza mural that was destroyed, and another mural the famous muralist painted over, I think here in L.A. Right, and the mural up in San Francisco. Anyway, when I considered the question myself in my own mind, I wasn't thinking about money. I didn't think about the commodification of art, which, in certain terms, I'm kind of opposed to. Because there was a time when music was something you shared with your friends. You got together, you know what I mean, and you played music. Now, it's all about selling albums and tickets and stuff. You know, it's music has become a commodity, which I don't know if that's a step towards democratization or not. But I kind of, at the same time, I agree and disagree with some of the things you said, because I think it is social justice, and I'm just wondering, I mean, how do you guys react to this? I mean, because I think it is a social justice issue in a lot of ways. And when I read the title of this, that's what I thought of, was the value of art to society. Not the value of art in terms of like $1 million Rothkos or whatever, but the value of art to us as people and as improving society. That's what I thought of.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I think one of the things that's so interesting about this moment is that the panel title has two words in it that we assume we understand their meanings, and one of them is value, and the other one is art. And it seems to me that to keep going with it, right, that one of the values of art, as evinced by all three of our panelists today, is that one has a critical questioning relationship to those terms. One doesn't occupy them fully. One has a sense that the very construct within which we have the conversation is already problematic. Like from the jump, we're in a problematic stance. And that there is, as Hamza said, you know, a certain kinds of alienation that happen as well, as much as we desire change and desire art and desire whatever our desire is. That there's also one of the things art does is plant seeds not only of beauty and love, but also of discontent and of disrepair, right? To break things that need to be broken, and sometimes to repair things that need to be repaired. So I suppose I might just bring us to a close by saying, like, the category is so valuable to all of us and so crucial to all of us, in part because it is so fungible and so filled with remarkable contradiction, and that within that space of contradiction, there is, as Hamza said earlier, a space for our curiosity. Like basically, if your curiosity is engaged, the thing in front of you probably is working its value and its magic on you. So I want to thank you all so much. Wait, these people here at Zócalo are so organized. It's time for us to close. Really, I've got cue cards provided to me. It's so great. Anyway, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. You will be able to find a summary of this talk at the ZócaloPublicSquare.org. It'll be there tomorrow. Plus, there will be interviews with all of us. And you can also subscribe to Zócalo's newsletter, podcast, and social media, all of which stand firmly outside any capitalist situation. They're just out there. And please, finally, join us at the NeueHouse Bradbury, which is in the Bradbury building down the block. There's an after party until 10:30. Andrea, Joel, Hamza, thank you so much. And thank you, our audience, for attending tonight. Thank you.